I'm sure by now a lot of people are aware of the tariff war between the US and China. The back and forth has actually been quite entertaining and interesting to watch, not just for Americans or Chinese people, but for everyone in the world, because we've been tuned in because of how crazy it has been. US putting tariff on China, China retaliating, US JD Vance, the vice president of America, calling Chinese workers peasants, China pushing back and showing the world that national dignity matters. So in light of that, I want to talk about what this should teach the rest of the world, but specifically African countries. What can we learn from the Chinese-US tariff war? For example, when it comes to self-respect, it should never be negotiable. It should be non-negotiable. And that's exactly what the Chinese have done. After Vance's comment, look at what they've done.
We borrow money from Chinese peasants to buy the things those Chinese peasants manufacture. That is not a recipe for economic prosperity. It's not a recipe for low prices, and it's not a recipe for good jobs in the United States of America.
中方对中美经贸关系的立场已经讲得很清楚了。听到这位副总统说出这样无知又缺乏礼貌的话，令人诧异，也感到悲哀。
And the lesson for Africa is that African nations should never normalize being talked down to. Leaders, intellectuals, and media figures must call out disrespect swiftly and confidently. A nation that respects itself earns respect from other nations. Why do you think China stood firm in the US tax tariff debacle? It is because they have built a strong internal economy. They know that they can handle this hit, this blow that they are facing. Of course, it's still a loss, but they are still stronger than that. They have created more relationships outside of their nation. They are good when it comes to diplomacy and the investment that they have made. And the lesson for Africa is that we need to industrialize and innovate and reduce over-reliance on imports or foreign aid. We are currently experiencing the withdrawal of US aid, right? As much as it has more negative impact than positive, we see how many countries and governments are panicking and crying over that. Imagine if we have built a system where we can provide for ourselves and we're not dependent on the West or the US, we would not be in the same position. We would be like China. We would say, okay, take your aid and I'll be just fine. But that's not the case because we didn't focus on building it internally. We started being dependent on others. And another thing I want to talk about is China, it has such a strong voice because they speak as one. If you've heard all the interviews or the officials talking about this situation, they speak the same language. They're in unison. They are united. But what about Africa? The actual truth is African countries deals with other nations individually instead of coming together and negotiating as African Union or a united front. We don't do that. But this is a lesson. If we have one voice, a united voice, we can have a stronger voice and we can push back, we can demand respect, and we can say, if you want to take your business, take it, but you have to take it from everywhere else in Africa, which means it will scare them. Like, you can even be bold to demand fairness and demand to be treated with respect and equality when it comes to export, imports, and the tariffs that they put on us. So yeah, I mean, considering what has been going on between China and US, I believe this is the best time to look at them and reflect and see, okay, China is handling it well because they worked on A, B, C, D, and how can we also be in that position in a few years? Because China has not always been a powerhouse. They were seen as a poor country, a poor nation just years ago. Now they made themselves important in the global stage, and they are where they are because of the work they put in their economy and their people. So I believe it can be done, and this is something I think we can learn from the current situation. Anyways,